Rain hammered the windows while the emergency room settled into that thin hush that comes before another storm. A homeless man staggered in, seized hard, and slumped to the floor as the monitor drew a flat line that felt like a door closing. Ava Reed moved first, voice steady as she called for help, checked responsiveness, and cleared space around the body. She planted her hands and drove compressions with clean depth and cadence, chest rising with bag valve mask breaths as oxygen hissed into the seal. She asked for an IV and got it on the first attempt. Eyes on the clock for timing that mattered more than noise. Epinephrine went in on schedule for a non-shockable rhythm, and the team cycled positions to keep compressions strong and even. The room held a tight rhythm of count, squeeze, and reassess. 2 full rounds of CPR with BVM support and medication stacked exactly when it should be. The monitor flickered, coughed up a weak complex, then settled into a pulse that rolled under Ava's fingers like a tired wave. Silence cracked into breath and busy motion as vitals stabilized and the stretcher rolled toward a bay. Outside, engines grew from a distant murmur to a measured presence. A line of black SUVs easing to the curb, with local patrol cars guiding traffic so the ambulance lane stayed clear. One vehicle carried a folded SATCOM antenna that caught the rain and glistened under the lights. Relief spread through the team like warm air after thunder. And yet a single question hung there with the smell of rain and antiseptic. Who were they coming for, and why now? At 25, Ava Reed chose the night shift because the dark felt softer and the halls asked fewer questions. She signed up for the cases that took patience more than praise. The man who slept near the loading dock, the young woman shivering through withdrawal. She moved quietly through triage, steady hands and a voice that calmed without trying, charting carefully and staying until the last monitor settled. Her coworkers learned to hand her the thankless pile, stock the IV closet, wipe the stretchers, arrange the instrument trays, double-check the crash bag. They called her slow behind closed doors and missed that her patients stabilized more often, that the angry ones softened after she sat with them, that the frequent flyer did not come back for 3 weeks straight. Her numbers lived in the computer, clean and unnoticed, while louder stories filled the break room. A thin scar traced the inside of her left forearm, pale against warm skin when the sleeve rode up. When someone asked about it, she smiled and kept moving, eyes already mapping exits, feet turning sideways to slide past a gurney without a bump, shoulders squaring just enough to keep space safe around a frightened patient. She scanned a room the way others checked a mirror, not nervous, simply aware, then returned to warm blankets and water cups as if that was all she had ever learned. The loneliness was chosen, and it fit like a well-worn jacket, and she believed that saving a life quietly was still saving it all the same. The ER ran hot after a chain of crashes on wet streets, every bay full and the hallway lined with stretchers. A middle-aged patient arrived pale and restless, with a rigid abdomen and skin cold to the touch, heart rate near 140, and mean pressure drifting toward the 50s. Labs flashed in with lactate climbing, and the first liter of fluid bought only a brief bump before the numbers sank again. The team hovered between options while monitors chimed, and the room felt smaller by the second. Ava Reed watched the screen. The belly, the way the pulse narrowed and would not hold. Then asked for a trauma consult now, with concern for a compressive hematoma affecting mesenteric flow rather than simple volume loss. The trauma surgeon stepped in, confirmed peritoneal signs, repeated a focused ultrasound that showed free fluid, and called for rapid damage control. In the operating room, they opened, packed, and relieved pressure while controlling active bleeding, then moved to critical care for staged resuscitation with cautious products. The blood pressure steadied and the heart rate settled into something a body could live with. Back in the ER, Ava restocked the airway cart and wiped down the gurney while the room exhaled. Dr. Nathan Burke brushed past and called it lucky timing. Already chasing another case and another story to tell, Ava kept her eyes on the tray, clicked the latches closed, and went to prepare a warm blanket for the next arrival. The injustice stung for a breath and then quieted, replaced by the steady calm that comes from knowing what you saw and saying only what the work required. They appeared just after the shift changed. Two men in black suits with dark glasses standing outside the ER glass as rain slid down in slow sheets. They did not knock. They did not wave. They simply watched the intake desk and then followed Ava Reed with their eyes as she moved from bay to bay. Minutes turned into hours while they stayed in the same spot. Shoulders squared. Hands still. The kind of patience that feels like pressure. Inside, lights hummed and monitors clicked while the sense of being studied settled over the room. Security Chief Ron Hayes stepped out under the awning and asked who they were. Voice measured and polite the way a former cop keeps things safe. Their answer was brief. That they were waiting for a person. And it landed with the finality of a closed file. They offered credentials to be checked without fuss, kept their tone even, and deferred to hospital policy about remaining outside. Hayes logged the contact and returned to the desk with the calm of someone who has seen this before, even if he did not like it. Out by the entrance, a row of black SUVs idled at a respectful distance. Headlights soft, engines low, with local patrol cars guiding traffic, so the ambulance lane stayed clear. One vehicle carried a folded SATCOM antenna that caught the streetlight and shed water in thin lines. A machine built to talk quietly across long distances. The staff began to speak in low voices. Work continued, and yet the mood cooled by a degree each minute. Ava shifted to a higher state of awareness, scanning corners and routes as if it were second nature, and kept her hands moving, charting, checking, doing the job, while the feeling grew that this was not rumor anymore, but deliberate watchfulness waiting for its moment. The gurney cut through the hallway as a young sailor lay rigid with a torn shoulder. Intake identified him as Special Warfare Operator 3rd Class Lucas Ward. Navy SEALs. Alert but grimacing with every bump. Ava Reed met the team at the bay. Clipped the pulse ox. Checked airway and breathing, and spoke in a steady cadence that slowed his chest. She donned gloves, placed a large bore IV in the uninjured arm, drew labs, and started warm fluids per standing orders. She assessed pain with a quick scale and prepared intravenous analgesia as the attending nodded. Respiratory rate, oxygen saturation, and chest rise stayed within range, and she kept the head of bed up to ease effort. Bleeding was controlled with a pressure dressing, and she verified distal pulse and capillary refill before securing the limb. Lucas searched her face, a memory stirring from a far night, and Ava redirected him to focus on breath in, breath out, and the steps they were taking now. Vitals stabilized by small degrees, and the line on the monitor began to look less like a cliff. Ava adjusted the flow, documented the doses, and stayed near enough to catch any shift while giving the room its quiet. Lucas held her gaze for a second and offered a nod that needed no words. Two nurses at the desk saw the exchange and traded a look, and the mystery around the quiet night nurse grew layer as the doors opened to the next arrival. Dr. Nathan Burke waited until the unit quieted, then used the spare key and swung open Ava Reed's locker with a guilty breath he could not steady. A small cloth pouch lay tucked behind folded scrubs, worn soft at the seams, and inside he found a faded patch that read, SOCOM Black Veal Med Restricted. His phone came up before he could think, and the shutter clicked. A reflex faster than caution. The hallway bulbs hummed and the metal door felt cold under his hand. He searched the terms and found almost nothing. A few scattered mentions that led to dead pages and error screens that looked older than they should. A warning flash that access was blocked and the device might be monitored. And heat climbed the back of his neck as if the air itself had moved. He locked the screen and shoved the phone into his pocket, suddenly aware of the camera near the ceiling and the squeak of a cleaning cart far down the hall. The word restricted would not leave his head, and the patch felt heavier in his palm than cloth should ever feel. He slid the pouch back exactly as he had found it and closed the locker with slow care, palm pressed flat to erase any sign. In that quiet he understood why Ava kept her head down and her voice low. Why she let small slights pass without a fight. Why she lived as if every minute mattered. Whatever Black Veil was, it lived in the dark and did not want company. He walked away with a new respect he did not know how to carry, and the unsettled sense that the night had shifted and would not shift back. The convoy arrived without drama. Engines low and lights steady as local patrol cars kept the ambulance lane open. Inside the lobby, the lead stepped forward and introduced himself as Commander David Rourke, Navy Commander 05 and Task Unit Commander working with JSOC. Credentials were presented at the desk. Badges checked. Names logged. And Security Chief Ron Hayes walked them through access points so a safe corridor could be set without blocking patient flow. Staff watched the quiet efficiency and felt the temperature in the room change. Rourke asked to meet Ava Reed for a national security matter tied to battlefield medical support, and he said it with the weight of someone used to carrying hard calls. He identified her capability as a field combat medic from a program called Black Veil, and the words landed like a key turning in a locked door. Dr. Nathan Burke started to object out of habit, then stopped when he met the calm in Rourke's eyes and the careful way the team deferred to hospital policy. Intake resumed as normal, and the corridors stayed clear for stretchers and family members. When the team reached the edge of the ER, operators in plain clothes set their feet and came to attention. A stillness more than a show. No salutes were given inside the building and in civilian attire, because that was not the place for ceremony. The response came as a single breath when the plan was affirmed. "Hooyah, ma'am." CMDR David Rourke stood near the nurse station with reins still on his shoulders and laid out the situation in clean lines. 6 intelligence personnel were pinned inside a hostile compound with multiple traumatic injuries and heavy bleeding and no safe window for evacuation. He stated that immediate remote care would be the only bridge to survival, and that the hospital could support this without disrupting civilian operations. His tone carried duty rather than drama, and the room listened. He placed a rugged tablet on the counter with SATCOM already linked and requested Ava Reed to assume medical command under Prolonged Field Care, guided by TCCC. Priorities were clear and practical. Control life-threatening hemorrhage with tourniquet placement and hemostatic gauze. Protect the airway with appropriate adjuncts if mental status declined, and manage breathing and ventilation while preventing hypothermia with active warming and dry insulation. Fluids would be conservative with permissive hypotension, where indicated, and blood products used if available with consideration of TXA per protocol and contraindications. Monitoring would include mental status trends, respiratory effort, pulse quality, and signs of ongoing bleeding while preparing for prolonged timelines. He addressed her by the call sign Angel and acknowledged that she had chosen a life of quiet healing, then said, the math of time and blood did not bend for anyone, and that without her guidance, 6 names would not see sunrise. Ava looked at the tablet and the jump bag and balanced a simple choice between ordinary peace and the gravity of lives on a clock. And the next part of the night waited for her answer. Ava Reed stood at the nurse station with the tablet in her hands and set her terms without raising her voice. She would hold sole medical authority for Prolonged Field Care, and Commander David Rourke would retain all tactical decisions. Orders tied to survival would follow the Black Veil protocol with no exceptions, and the hospital's workflow would remain protected. She watched the team as she spoke and saw that each person understood the lines she was drawing. She laid out the standards in plain language that fit the room. Tourniquets placed high and tight only when indicated and reassessed on a schedule. Hemostatic gauze packed to the source of bleeding and secured. Airway adjuncts used if mental status declined with continuous monitoring of breathing and ventilation. Prevent hypothermia with active warming and dry layers. Fluids given with care to avoid washing out clots, and blood products considered when available with TXA, used only if the patient met protocol and had no contraindication. Vital signs tracked alongside mental status and signs of ongoing hemorrhage. Rourke met her eyes and gave a short acknowledgement that carried the weight of a signed order. Copy. Ava Reed in medical command. Operators in plain clothes set their feet and came to attention inside the ER, where there would be no salutes in civilian attire. Their answer came as one breath. "Hooyah, ma'am." In that moment, the hesitation fell away and the work ahead became simple. She lifted the jump bag, nodded once to Hayes at security, and confirmed the channel that would carry her voice to the edge of the night. Ava Reed accepted the rugged SAT tablet and the medical jump bag with a nod that felt like a seal placed on the night. Operators formed a soft perimeter around her, loose spacing and clear hands, guiding her through sliding doors that breathed out the smell of rain. Security and local patrol kept the ambulance lane open, steering arrivals to the right and family traffic to the left. The walk was unhurried, quiet, and careful enough that no patient saw their path disturbed. Engines turned over in a steady ripple, and the convoy eased from the curb without flashing lights or sharp horns. Local units pulled ahead to manage the intersection, and the SUVs merged into the stream as if they belonged to the road all along. The antenna on the command vehicle folded low and caught drops that gleamed for a second, then fell away. The sound of the engines thinned and stretched, and finally became a hum that the rain swallowed. Inside the ER, the door closed and the room felt larger and emptier at the same time. A single IV bag tapped a slow beat, a metronome for breaths that had gone quiet. Nurses and techs stood with hands still and eyes wide, and Dr. Nathan Burke braced himself on the counter as the truth landed where pride used to live. The silence held a shape like a question. What did we just witness, and how will we be worthy of it when she comes back? Phones began ringing before dawn and did not stop. Reporters on one line and government offices on another, while the switchboard filled with names no one recognized. Administration moved fast with a clear media policy. One spokesperson only. No staff interviews. Coordination with local police for any follow-up. The message inside the building was simple and firm. Keep caring for patients and let leadership handle the noise. The hallways felt tense but purposeful, like a unit settling into a drill it already knew. A mandatory meeting pulled the department into the conference room where security replayed the footage from the night before. The screen showed operators in civilian clothes come to attention in the ER and answer in unison with a short "Hooyah, Mom," and the room held its breath. The point landed with clarity that this was not a formal salute and not theater. It was discipline and respect for medical authority in a civilian space. Nurse Lily Grant spoke about the way Ava had carried quiet weight to live an ordinary life, and heads nodded as if a lens finally came into focus. Security Chief Ron Hayes and the head of department, a former Navy officer, walked through the culture piece by piece so no one would need to guess. The operators did not salute indoors in civilian attire. They stood still and answered as a team, and that was enough to mark who led the medical plan. By lunchtime, a temporary sign went up with a brief line about humility and respect, and staff began signing in for short TCCC refreshers that fit between rounds. The air lost its edge and picked up a different current. Less competition and more attention. The quiet start of a culture that might actually change. After 3 days and 2 long nights, Ava Reed walked back through the staff entrance in clean scrubs with a tired calm in her eyes. The unit rose without a word. A quiet line of respect that needed no announcement. Monitors humming like distant rain. She checked the board, greeted the charge nurse, and moved toward the first bay as if the last 72 hours had been only another shift. The stillness carried warmth instead of fear, a welcome that settled into the walls. Dr. Nathan Burke stepped from the doorway with hands unsteady and asked to speak, voice low and plain. He offered a clear apology for the way he had judged her, and she answered with a simple request to protect the most vulnerable first and to make kindness a habit, not an afterthought. He nodded and exhaled, and the room felt lighter by a measure no one could chart. Work resumed with a steadier rhythm. Carts rolling, voices softer, doors closing with care. Late in the afternoon, a single black SUV eased to the curb and waited in the drizzle. CMDR David Rourke walked in alone to the reception desk, left a sealed manila envelope for Nurse Reed, and departed without crossing into the ER. No ceremony, no flourish. The right boundary kept between military and hospital. Ava opened the envelope near the window and found 6 small handwritten notes from people who were alive because a plan had held when time tried to unmake it. She read them one by one until the words blurred and a tear found its way down her cheek. She folded the notes into her pocket and whispered, "I choose healing every single day." And the room breathed in something gentle that felt like a promise kept. Change began with a policy on a single page that asked for respect in every direction and at every hour. Administration rolled out brief trainings that fit between rounds. Built from TECC with practical pieces adapted from TCCC for a civilian floor. Nurses practiced placing tourniquets high and tight only when indicated, and packing wounds with hemostatic gauze to the source. They reviewed basic airway support, prevention of hypothermia with warm blankets and dry layers, and safe handoff routines that carried details without drama. The sign-up sheet filled with familiar names. Many of them veterans of the unit who wanted skill over certificates. Shifts felt different as people paused to help rather than compete. And decisions traveled faster because trust did not have to fight its way into the room. A tech who used to hide in the supply closet started checking crash carts without being asked. And a new grad learned to ask better questions. Charts got cleaner, calls got calmer, and the tone turned from sharp to steady. Security Chief Ron Hayes updated the playbook for coordination with local police when federal teams might approach a hospital. The plan balanced safety and care, kept ambulance lanes clear, and defined who spoke to whom so work could continue without a hiccup. People noticed the difference in small ways that add up. Fewer frayed tempers, more quiet thank yous, a slower heartbeat in a place that almost never slows. In the long white hallway, a soft promise took hold that if JSOC ever called again, this house would still choose to save first and talk second. Rain sheets across the glass, and the night remembers the first hush before alarms. A gloved hand seals the bag valve mask, and the rhythm finds its beat. Compressions, clean and steady, while oxygen whispers into a waiting chest. The monitor that once held a flat line blooms into a pulse, and the room exhales as if allowed to breathe again. In that turn from silence to life, a thought drifts through like a marker on a map. Shadow Medic is officially back online. Streetlight glints along a folded SATCOM antenna and rain pearls on black metal. A quiet signal that voices can travel far when they must. A tourniquet is tightened high and checked again. Fingers steady. Eyes on skin color and capillary refill. The simple craft of keeping blood where it belongs. Operators stand at attention in civilian clothes and answer as one. Hooyah, Mom. Not ceremony, but discipline and trust set in place. The image holds less for spectacle and more for the line it draws around duty joined with care. A manila envelope rests on a desk, and inside are 6 small notes written by hands that will now see another sunrise. The pages carry thanks that read like the sound of breath returning, and they settle into a pocket with the weight of something earned. The hospital hallway brightens without getting louder, and the credo finds words that fit the walls and the work. Humility is the highest rank. We leave with a simple vow to choose healing again tomorrow and to honor the quiet strength that makes it possible. If this story moved you, add your voice with the simple promise, I will live kindly, and join our community by subscribing for more veteran stories that honor quiet strength. Your comment helps carry the message into real hallways where patience and respect can change outcomes. Bring someone with you next time and share the video with a friend who could use a calm light at the end of a long day. We kept the details true so you can trust the telling. CPR for asystole followed 2 full cycles of compressions with bag valve mask, support, and epinephrine. And there was no shock for a non-shockable rhythm. Inside a hospital in civilian attire, operators came to attention and answered Hooyah Mom rather than performing a formal salute. The commander was Navy Commander 05 David Rourke. The wounded sailor was SO 3 Lucas Ward from the SEALs. And the perimeter outside worked with local police, while a vehicle carried a folded SATCOM antenna for secure comms. Carry this spirit into your own life in small ways you can feel by the end of the day. Offer patience to the person who is hurting and unseen. Choose the slower answer that protects dignity. Help the quiet professional on your team do their best work without having to ask. We will keep telling stories that choose healing every single day and that respect the people who serve with skill and humility. Subscribe. Comment with "I will live kindly," and come back for the next chapter. Bring the tone of calm accuracy and steady care into your shift, your home, and your circle, so the ripple of one quiet choice becomes the way a whole room breathes. Thank you for spending time with this story and with the people it honors. What you watched is fiction that respects medical and military practice. Program names like Black Veil are imagined, while real frameworks such as TCCC, TECC-C, PFC, and JSOC were used in the right context to lend accuracy without revealing sensitive operations or protected techniques. Our intent is to tell a human story with care, not to disclose anything that should remain secure. We are grateful to emergency department staff, veterans, and first responders who carry difficult nights so others can see another day. Clinical steps shown here were adapted for ethics and safety. For asystole, care followed 2 full cycles of chest compressions with bag valve, mask support, and epinephrine at appropriate intervals. And there was no defibrillation for a non-shockable rhythm. In a hospital setting and in civilian attire, operators stood at attention and responded, "Hooyah, Mom," rather than performing a formal indoor salute. We also depicted lawful coordination with local police when federal teams approach a medical facility, so ambulance access remains open and care remains uninterrupted. A vehicle with a folded SATCOM antenna was shown to reflect secure communications without dramatizing tactics. If you serve in any capacity, thank you for the steadiness you bring to moments most people never see. We will keep telling stories that honor healing, restraint, and respect. And we will keep checking every detail so trust can grow. Choose healing every single day